Okay, we're live. You're listening to Seattle Neighborhood Crier, and our producer today is Cindy Barker. Cindy.
Hey, hello everybody. So we have a very different program today. We've focused in the past on emergency preparedness and Civics 101 and community engagement. And what we have today are two guests who are really going to focus on how community builds. And they have an exciting program that I'd never heard of before we got into this. And they are part of the group called Compassionate Seattle, and they have an event coming up called Compassion Games. And so even though Compassionate Network is a larger global entity, we're going to really talk about how that applies to Seattle and the way that they found a way to have a kind of fun and meaningful way to show compassion around your whatever you're doing, your community efforts. So we're going to talk to two people today, John Hale, who's the Executive Director of Compassionate Seattle, and John Raymer, who is actually the founder of the Compassion Games. And so we'll start first with John Hale, who will give us a little history and overview. So John?
Thank you, Cindy, and hello to all. I'm really pleased to be part of this. And our story does begin very far back in Seattle, but most significantly 6 years ago in 2008. When we brought to the city the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, a whole series of luminaries to spend 5 days on what was called the Seeds of Compassion, addressing the roots of compassion from a science, from a youth, from a psychology, from a spiritual perspective. And in those 5 days, 155,000 people spent and committed their days to addressing the various perspectives of compassion. That was quite a transformative experience, and those of us that were involved in the design of that program knew that it was not about the program, but rather what would come later. But none of us had a clear idea of what that was, but we kept meeting, and out of that became a recognition that we have a lot of groups that are working in their own special areas, but what happened during the Seeds of Compassion was that they connected. People came from their various corners and found common ground in that heart and kindness. So what we envisioned was a concept of a network of networks. That was a situation where we could stay active in our own areas, our neighborhoods, our special interest groups, but we have a way of connecting and finding what was able to be shared and how to amplify our effectiveness. So that network of networks began and emerged until another event occurred, and that was when Karen Armstrong, an English author and comparative religions expert, won a TED Prize. And her wish was to create a charter of compassion that would give us a framework globally to establish as a litmus test on our actions, compassion in action. So she did create, with the help of people throughout the globe from all of the major world traditions, a charter for compassion based on the Golden Rule. Interestingly enough, in 2010, we had an event that led to Seattle, the city council and mayor, proclaiming their commitment to a 10-year campaign to create a compassionate city. As it turns out, Seattle was the first city in the world to make such a commitment. And that really was a landmark event, and it represented a birthing, really, of Compassionate Seattle. Compassionate Seattle being a group that would stand as steward to the living into that proclamation by the city and the city and local regional commitment to that 10-year plan for compassion. As we birthed that, we also recognize that a compassionate city is an uncomfortable city. And that's one of the issues that has given Compassionate City, Seattle, its beacon and its focus. An uncomfortable city is one that will not rest if there are children without food, if there are families without shelter, if there's violence and racism on the streets. And so it's really a focus on common good and looking at the people on the margins as the business of all of us to help everybody with a hand up as needed. But also, a compassionate city is a city of kindness and relationships, which really gets us into the neighborhoods and living next to each other. So that's why it's really great that we're having this conversation, because it's how we live our lives ourselves with our neighbors and for the values that relate to civic pride and involvement, relate to emergency preparedness, and how it's up to us to work together. So that's what leads us to the work that we do, and we address the discomfort through working with sectors in the community that relate to areas like homelessness and housing and economic justice and youth at promise and the like. So that's where the work does, convening community leaders to actually be involved in collective impact, to work together beyond their boundaries for the common good, much like what the emergency preparedness and block watch areas are doing as well. So as we look at that element, that's creating capital and value in the community. But we also have that consciousness awareness that is really at the root of the work that we all do. And so Compassionate Seattle has as a key sector, we call them constellations, the Compassion Games. John Rubel is the passionate chair and leading focus for that, not only locally but globally, and his reach is far and wide. But Seattle is the hub for that work, and we have an opportunity to test our practices locally and expand them globally. We have an opportunity to learn from the practices of those from all corners of the earth. So what we really are seeing is the ability to expand our reach throughout the community in raising awareness of compassion for ourselves, for our children, for our community. And we look to Compassion Games as the leader to help us move in that direction. And so it's with great pride that I have an opportunity to introduce my friend, John Raber. We've worked together for another 12 years and are locked in partnership for this compassion journey. John?
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, a couple things. So when we had the Seeds of Compassion here, which was the largest event in the history of the state, one of the things that happened for me was we met with Hereditary Chief Phil Lane Jr. And this was a really important part of the journey, in that here we live in a city named after a Duwamish chief, and here we're talking about compassion. And it just was such that, especially when you meet Phil and you realize what a remarkable humanitarian Phil is. And Phil shared with us these guiding principles that over 40 years had been developed and became core to the work that we're doing at the Compassionate Action Network, which was the group we set up to sustain the work of the Seeds of Compassion. And those principles are summarized this way. They say, starting from within, working in a circle, in a sacred manner, we heal and develop ourselves, our relationships, and the world. And that's been at the core of this work, and it's what keeps me personally grounded in realizing that when you're talking about a topic like compassion and how we act towards each other, how we act towards the earth, how we act towards ourselves, that this is an inside job. And in fact, at the time when I was executive director of Compassion Action Network, before Compassion Seattle was formed, we said we need a four-way partnership. And that approach just kind of became our theory of change when people ask, well, how are you going to make these changes happen? And we said that it's going to require bottom-up as well as top-down. And the outside in, meaning ideas from other places, what we can learn from other communities that were taking on an ambitious effort such as this. But the fourth way would have to start from the inside out. So the idea of bottom-up, top-down, outside in, and inside out became kind of framework for thinking about how we're going to go about making these changes. And it's a beautiful vision, the idea of living in a compassionate city. But frankly, it's really daunting, as we see every day in the news, how easy it is for any one of us to forget what it is to be kind and thoughtful to each other, and the pain that a lot of people are in, and how do we cope as a community authentically, really take on these issues. So John mentioned before this term, what happened was at that time, we thought it was a great idea to be a compassionate city. Of course, you know, that didn't make it easy. And then we thought, you know, we heard about this other idea that seemed really compelling, that many communities are adopting, this idea of collective impact. And that's about this idea that there are 5 conditions necessary to make a collective impact. So you need everybody at the table, multi-stakeholder process. And you need to have some shared agenda. Not so easy to do. Everybody with their self-interests, trying to find a common ground and shared interests, but that's the first of these 5 conditions. You need some way to measure this, because everyone says, well, okay, how are you going to measure your progress? How are you going to know you're making strides towards achieving your goal? What's your output? What are your outcomes? What's your impact? You know, so that's the second condition. You have to have ways to measure this. You got to have mutually reinforcing activities. You got to find ways to strengthen the whole and be there and supportive of each other and do things that are mutually reinforcing. And how do you make sure there's continuous communication flowing between all the parties, as well as how do you have a backbone organization to support all this happening? Well, that was another beautiful idea. Wow, collective impact sounds really good. But in our case, a funny thing happened in that when we launched this 10-year campaign to be a compassionate city, we invited other communities to get involved with us. And sure enough, I mean, I'm proud to tell you now there's over 300 cities and communities around the world that have embarked on this idea. But one city in particular that was outstanding, that embraced the Charter for Compassion and the idea of a 10-year campaign, was Louisville, Kentucky, or the Ville, as they say. And they are doing incredible work there. And we were inspired by their work so much that we gave an award to the mayor, Mayor Greg Fisher, who's a remarkable leader. He ran on a platform that included lifelong learning, health, and compassion, and won and is a beloved mayor, Greg Fisher. So we gave them an award. They came out here to Seattle. We honored them, thinking, you know, that we wanted to strengthen what they were doing and support them. They wrote us a letter. And in the letter, the mayor said, well, we're the most compassionate city in the world, that Louisville is the most compassionate city and would be so until proven otherwise. I said, what? What do you mean you're the most compassionate city in the world? How could you claim such a thing? And knowing that Jennifer Lawrence, the star of the Hunger Games, is from Louisville, we said, well, maybe we need to have a challenge. Maybe we need to start this compassion games as a way of actually challenging each other in what we call a co-opetition. So the vision here is that we don't cooperate, we don't compete against. A co-opetition is you cooperate with each other to compete not against but with each other, to challenge yourselves, to really identify now and do some of those things that the collective impact talks about. So we set up, okay, if our agenda is to create a compassionate city, what could be the measures? So the measures for the compassion games are the number of volunteers, the hours of service, the dollars raised for local causes, and the number of people that are served. And that became another way to meet that condition. Said, well, if we all work collaboratively to compete with each other in these games, there'll be mutually reinforcing activities. And we work with United Way of King County, for instance, using the Day of Caring, which this year is on the 19th. And how do we maintain the communications and be a backbone? So in support for Compassionate Seattle, the Compassion Games is here in Seattle as a team participating in the games, but there are communities in the Compassion Games all over the world challenging each other. So we have those conditions necessary for collective impact. We have a backbone organization. We have a way of communicating. And here in Seattle, the games are played, and all over the world, the games are now played for 11 days, from September 11th through the 21st. And there are teams, for instance, last year they played in the prisons in California. For the first time ever, they had 11 days without a single incident of violence. A woman in the prisons known as Evil changed her name to Tinkerbell. And it's amazing the things that people have done with the Compassion Games down in the schools. They're playing them right now in the United Arab Emirates. And there's really 4 steps. So you commit to play. You play. Now you can do service projects to earn these points. You can set up there, you can sign up and be a secret agent of compassion, and you receive a mission every day for the 11 days. You can do random acts of kindness. There's all sorts of ways that people can get people out and engaged. And Cindi, you know, one of the things for me about emergency preparedness, why it's such an interesting topic, is because it's something that everybody can relate to, and it's something that can get people engaged and go beyond some of the boundaries that keep us apart. And we're finding that compassion has the same kind of call, and that everybody wants to be in a more compassionate city. Everybody wants to be thoughtful and kind and be treated that way. And that vision of the golden rule about treating others the way you want to be treated, that's really at the root of all this, and building our capacity to develop the skills to be that way and to live that way. And it's a challenge for everybody. It's not easy, and I don't know any other way except to challenge people to say we need to change the game.
Mm-hmm.
We're in this game of war.
Yep,
How much more? And we can't.
I totally agree.
If you move the game better, you know, and if we play that the point of the game is to live in a better community in which we're good towards each other and treat each other with respect and kindness and caring, we can build the kind of culture that John's been talking about. So I can hold it there for now, but the games, compassiongames.org, the idea, we're going to be doing all sorts of stuff for this 11 days here in Seattle, starting 9/11. We want to honor the Compassion All-Stars. We're looking for ordinary folks doing extraordinary things in communities. We're working close with the tribes. There's enormous threats to the Salish Sea that we're looking to take on as compassion towards Mother Earth. There's a whole 4 days of action in concert with the work that Bill McKibben's doing, and back east there'll be this whole People's Climate March and Rally happening the weekend of September 20th and 21st. We're a part of that. We see compassion for ourselves, for each other, and for the earth is all interconnected, and we're hoping that these games will inspire each of us and all of us to challenge ourselves, to learn how to get better at being better citizens and taking better care of our world. So I'll hold it there and let you, Cindi, add or John add anything I might have missed.
Well, what I want you to do also is to go back over, because, you know, when we first talked about this, I went, well, emergency preparedness, I mean, that's kind of like, to me, a functional thing. But when you were the one who made me think, you know, it is a compassionate thing, because a lot of what we do is we help talk to people about easy ways for them to prepare, easy ways for them to start to engage in thinking about this, an easy way, and emergency preparedness is really around, you're gonna be helping your neighbor in the future. So
right.
While we don't make compassion happen now, we set the seeds for compassion in the future. And I'd really like you to give examples of stuff. Get people, you know, who are sitting here listening to this going, well, I belong to a soccer team. What could we do? I belong to a group that maintains a ravine. What could we do? Give us some great ideas of some of the things that Louisville did or some other people have you've seen do. Just spark some ideas going for us.
Oh, yeah. Well, we had the Compassion Harvest last year. We raised a ton of food for people that are hungry. That all of those clubs and communities can take on service projects. So we're trying to establish new levels of engagement. That's the whole challenge here, is return on engagement, getting people off the sidelines and out onto the playing field. So if you're an association or a group or organization, or interfaith, interspiritual, so for instance, around these 4 days of action I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a spill drill happening up in the San Juan Islands. We're working with the Backbone campaign to do artful activism. There'll be educational events happening to teach people about what do you do in case of a spill, how will we respond. The challenges are great, and organizations that have that kind of expertise and knowledge we're engaging with, so the National Park Service, we've been talking to the EPA, we're working with the tribes. The tribes are obviously involved. In fact, the tribes will be signing an international treaty to protect the sacredness of the Salish Sea. And one of the things we can do, we've been all invited to come up to northern Vancouver to the home of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, who has taken the leadership on stopping these tankers that they're planning to bring into the sea, through the Salish Sea, going from 4 to 35 sailings a month. So organizations that have expertise, let's just talking about the earth here, right? Mm-hmm. And what we can do to preserve and protect the Salish Sea. There's an initiative to make the entire Salish Sea a marine sanctuary. People don't know this, but 40% of the coast of California is preserved as a marine sanctuary. And it doesn't hurt the economy there at all. You know, Silicon Valley's doing fine. But you go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, that's all preserved and protected. there are initiatives like that and solutions that we can get involved with here, and we want to use those days to build awareness and educate folks.
And
So if
let
you're
me
somebody
ask,
who knows these solutions, we want to help get the word out. If you're somebody who wants to learn about these solutions, we want to make it easy for you to find out about them.
so you can go to your website to find out those larger, especially the international opportunity or the ones that are already being organized, people. And I think Jet will be displaying your website so that people can go sign up.
Yeah, you can filter the events locally and see what's happening here, and you can add your events here. And we're working with United Way as well. The 19th is the Day of Caring. I mean, we built a playground last year. I mean, there's a ton of stuff we can do in communities together. And
Okay,
if people want to organize a service project, they certainly can.
So one way is if you can't come up with your own idea, go to your website. But you said something where I just went, duh. The pea patches, a lot of them already harvest for food banks.
Yes.
And so during
Yes.
these games, they would just go in and they would register and they would get the points and they'd be part of that competition for us. Right?
That's right. And you mentioned, it was Richard Conlon when he was city council member, and Phyllis Shulman, who was so key in setting up the whole Pea Patch program here. Phyllis is involved in the Compassion Games. Richard's been a great supporter of all the compassionate work that we've been doing in Seattle for years. So Pea Patches, feeding people is obviously a great thing that we could do. Schools, we're also putting on an event here from Sandy Hook to Seattle, bringing in folks who are involved in the tragedy in Sandy Hook to talk about how do we deal with getting rid of bullying in the schools, how do we, culture change projects. This is really something we all need to learn how to do. And we're beginners at this, but the schools are a major opportunity for us. It's unbelievable. Most of the folks my age, when they go into schools, can't realize and appreciate how profoundly different the school experience is for these kids and how challenging it is to be young at this time. And they're looking to us to be their guides and to restore resources and support for them. So there's many places in our communities we can bring compassion and we can bring this kind of culture change thinking.
Yep. I want to take a minute and ask John Hale if he has anything he wants to add before I have a couple more questions.
I think John has covered the waterfront very well. The issue of compassion is really nothing different than the human heart that we have. Compassion, I guess, is sometimes not understood in the same way, but one definition that makes a lot of sense to me and makes it really personal is that it's letting your heart be broken and then acting in accordance with that feeling. And that really opens it to how we feel about the people around us, because your heart is more easily broken when you identify with other people you love, people you respect, people you admire. The work is really something that we do every day with some people. The challenge is, how do we widen that circle? And the recent City Civic Health Index pointed out how significant Seattle is in terms of its activism in communities with politics on critical issues like the environment and economic justice. But we're also measured in areas that we need to improve on how we relate to our exact neighbors. Surprisingly, our neighborliness is very low compared to the other 51 cities that are measured. And that leaves us an opportunity that Compassion Games can really work to, and that we're trying to do throughout all of our efforts with Compassionate Seattle. How do we really demonstrate that identification and empathy with our neighbors and find new ways of engaging with them who really are still strangers? And so the Compassion Games and the build-up to that is really significant. And looking at ways that we might work together in terms of block watch, in terms of emergency preparedness in each neighborhood, excellent ways throughout the year of being able to add that kindliness to our actions.
Yep. You said you had a phrase there that really struck me. It was called widening the circle. And before I go back to John, that really applies to me around how your games are organized. I heard you say you can contribute as an individual, but you can contribute as a family. Maybe it's the time you want to take to teach your children compassion, and so you sign up as a family. and then there's your block, that's the block watch side, and then there's your neighborhood, and then it builds up into your community, like I live in the community of West Seattle, to build up to the city. So there, and then you even took it beyond that, the region that we live in and the nations that we live in. So it's fantastic that there's this opportunity to plug in at whatever level you're comfortable or whatever level you feel resonates with you. John, anything else you want to say about the games? Because I want to, or either John, sounded like John Hale wants to say something.
Just the one focus is that it really is up to us. It starts with us, and so it's a grassroots momentum building. It's not up to somebody else to break the ice, and where we start is where we need to start and then grow from there.
Yep, exactly. John Raymer, you want to add some stuff, and then I've got one follow-up question for John Raymer.
Well, I was just going to bring people up to speed on one point. So it is, the idea of being played in the prisons was so novel, but they're doing it again this year because it works so well. Also in LA County, the Department of Mental Health has embraced the Compassion Games and is working to bring it into all the schools there. So for those who are involved in the institutions as well, so there's the grassroots, kind of the bottom-up stuff we can do, right? But also we want to address some of these systemic changes that need to happen. And Compassion does have, you said this before about widening the circle, Cindi. You know, years ago we stumbled on this phrase that you connect through your similarity and then innovate through your diversity. And that's one of the opportunities and challenges that we have in our city. It's very divided, as you know, the north and the south. And it's hard enough to feel for people that look like us and, think like us. Well, how are we going to deal with people that don't look like us and think like us? And how do we become more pluralistic in our thinking to recognize there are many right answers to these problems? And how do we develop the capacity to respect each other's histories and listen past our differences to find solutions to these challenges? This is what I hope the games offers, by play, by getting out onto the field and engaging and going beyond our comfort zones. Not into our panic zone, but into our stretch zone, that we're going to discover some things about how we can change. I mean, it's the Chinese proverb, if we don't change our direction, we're likely to wind up where we're headed.
Yep.
And this has got to change. And I don't know if anyone's got a better idea, but I'm sure open to it.
No,
and,
we love,
I'll give up the Compassion game, go play another game. If you got a better game in town to play, I'm trying to, like everybody, like you, Cindi. I mean, I'm assuming you're making tens of thousands of dollars for doing this, right?
Oh yeah, sure. I get sometimes somebody buys me a cup of coffee.
Well, but that's my point. You're giving of yourself. You're being generous in the choices you're making. Care about the community. We need to strengthen those impulses and get more people to play.
Well, and that actually is the one point I kind of want to spend a little time on as we near the end here. John Raymer, you were making some really important points about five conditions it takes to make an impact. So even though the games is a time-limited period, we're going to want to continue this the rest of the year. And for those of us who do this, I was taking notes. So I wanted to go over the 5 conditions to make an impact, because as you come out of the games and you see what that does, for you emotionally, for your community, I want to make sure I got those 5, and we reiterate those for our listeners. You want to have multiple stakeholders, so that talked about everybody at the table. You have a shared agenda. You have a way to measure your progress. You have mutually reinforcing activities. And what's the 5th one?
Continuous. Well, it's actually
communication.
Okay, so continuous communication is the 4th one, and then a backbone organization is the 5th. You combined the multi-stakeholder with shared agenda. So, so it's having that shared agenda and requires the multi-stakeholder process, right? Then having a way to measure, having mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and backbone. Now, if you Google the Social Innovation Review Journal from Stanford, they wrote the seminal article, and it's called Collective Impact. And there are collective impact initiatives happening in our region, mostly around the educational system. There's the Roadmap Project and Pathways, and it's a good framework for recognizing that no one of us can fix these problems. Government can't do it by itself. Business can't do it by itself. And nonprofits can't do it. So together, that's the idea there. And that's why the games was, for me, an easy way to make those conditions real without having to teach everyone about those conditions, but actually live those conditions.
Okay. What else would you want to add? I mean, I think Jet's got the website up. Any other activities you guys
Who's the
have
most
going on?
compassionate neighborhood? Who's the most compassionate neighborhood in Seattle? That's what I want to know. Because West
Oh,
Seattle, I mean, you guys are very active over there, but I don't know how compassionate you are.
yeah. I'm not too sure. You know, I was resonating when you were talking about, neighbors sometimes don't always engage, and I'm going like, yeah, that's a problem in West Seattle sometimes. Yeah,
Well, we want to challenge everybody
I
and
would,
tell those stories. We want to hear people know of extraordinary folks doing, ordinary folks doing extraordinary things. Andy Smallman, he runs the Puget Sound Community School. He's been teaching kindness for years. He had the idea of running the Compassion All-Stars, working with Austin Williams, who's got a great youth-led program called What's Good 206. Everybody should check out WG206.org. What's Good 206 tells a story about young people doing positive things in our community.
Mhm.
And the Compassion All-Stars are a way for any of us to report, to give a scouting report on neighbors, people you've known in your community who are not looking for recognition, but are doing things that are noteworthy and that would appreciate being recognized. And nobody can lose the Compassion Games. The more we play, the more everybody wins, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of a culture hack. We're culture hacking here, Cindi.
Well, I'm gonna bring this also back. I remember the Seeds of Change. I did not realize that the council had, set us up to be a compassionate city. So where are they on supporting the Compassion Games? Have you talked to the city council? And because, we can help get the word out one way, but for the city to re-engage would be fantastic.
Yeah, John could speak to that. Or maybe
The audio broke up. I'm not hearing.
So, John Hale, if the city council was helping to promote compassion earlier, are they involved with this round of the Compassion Games? Are they helping get the word out? Is the Department of Neighborhoods helping you?
Mm-hmm.
As John mentioned, we have been working with council members in terms of both aspects. More is to be done. We're excited about the fact that our current mayor, during the interviewing and during the debates, had identified compassion as the characteristic personally that he has the highest value for and tries to emulate. That speaks highly for the long-term perspectives that we're looking at. Richard Conlon, Phyllis Schulman, John found great support from them from the very beginning when the campaign began, and we're seeing that continue. I think the thing that is a new twist is something that we really began to emphasize more early this year, and that was the uncomfortable nature of a compassionate city. So there are the dual elements of really engaging kindness in our hearts initially and growing that outward, but it's also recognizing that there are some really severe problems that affect many people in our city and our region that defy easy solutions. And collective impact is a way that we can engage people who are community leaders in a way that will address the systems, policies, and practices that must change to really sustain the kind of changes that we're looking for. So really, the council is where it's at, but we also are looking at how do we bring to the councils and to the different organizations that can allocate resources and establish policies, how can we bring actionable recommendations to them? So we're working in ways that are related to these different sectors that I mentioned earlier. Homelessness and housing. Real Change News has a petition drive right now called Outside In. What they have recognized is that after 9 years and the 10-year campaign to end homelessness, many groups have been working long hours and working together to end homelessness. But the sad fact is that the one-night count in January was up 14% from the year before.
Yep.
So there's something that needs to be done differently. What we're doing is working together with them to try to mobilize the community to understand more clearly that there are these issues that must be addressed. And it's not really anyone's problem, it's all of our problems. And so we're engaged right now to help identify the action plans that physically need to be implemented once resources are allocated, and who will be accountable for, in fact, adjusting the reality and making it happen. So it's as John says, it's all sides. It's bottom up, top down, outside in, inside out. We're all part of the equation. We're looking at doing the same thing with education right now, and we have a conference coming up in April that will be the first regional conference for compassion schools, to build a network between educators and parents and counselors and community partners to establish a focus on the environment within our schools and extracurricular activities that will emphasize kindness and will establish a nurturing environment that will lead to all students being able to graduate with the skills necessary to be successful. It's a process that doesn't end overnight, but it's a process that involves us all. And so just like we look at these problems and sometimes find them hopeless, we need to roll our sleeves up and work together. And as John so well does, we can have fun in the process by challenging each other and our neighbors and whatever to really come together and recognize that we need to use that muscle of compassion and put it to work as a verb.
Cindi, you're muted.
Yeah.
You know, I do that. I'm, chat, and then So you talked about an important thing, which was one of my questions, that the schools are going to actually have a conference so that we can continue that dialogue for compassion in schools. I was wondering how that was going to work, so that's good to know about the conference. And then, John Raymer, we've got a question from the audience. You talked about a journal. Do you have a website for that? It was the Stanford Social Innovation Journal?
Yeah.
Can
I
you
can get you the website, but the publication is Stanford Social Innovation Journal.
Okay, so
I can put it in.
Okay, we can put that in the program notes, so as long as we Google for that. So I think, well, that's okay. We're coming pretty close to the end of our session, and so I think, John Hale, you gave me some good summary words there. John Raymer, do you have anything else you want to add? John Raymer?
Just gratitude to everybody listening. For all of us.
I know. I cannot wait.
Time. Can you hear me?
Clearly, we're going to have... Yes.
Yeah.
And I think clearly we're going to have you back after September.
If you guys can hear me. Maybe you can't.
Oh, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Oh, there we go.
Well, I don't want to show up as losers. I mean, let me tell you guys. Louisville said they were so compassionate that they'd come out to Seattle to help us beat them. So I ask everyone who's listening, we need your help. This is a serious challenge that we're facing from these other communities claiming to be more compassionate than we are. We're also brainiacs and educated out here, but socially isolated and disconnected from each other.
Nothing like.
And a lot of us are realizing this. These devices, are just kind of taking over our world. We need to come back to being with each other to address the challenges and the joys of living in community together. That's part of the fun of what we're trying to do here.
Yep, exactly. We do a calendar of events for each of our shows, so as the month builds up, you might want to tell us how many teams you've got registered, and we can get some status as we go along. That would be great. All right, I think I will bring this to an end. It was an excellent topic. I learned a lot today, and especially the parts about how to be impactful within our own daily activities, as well as how to engage and show the city how to be a compassionate on the world stage. So I think we'll have some closing calendar notices from Jet, so I'll turn it over to him.
Links will be in the show notes, and calendar information will be in the show notes too. And that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.